It's 3:42 p.m. on Thursday, October 17th, 2024, in Brentwood, Long Island. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the Roosevelt High School parking lot, and the temperature hovers at 64 degrees. Perfect autumn weather. Elena Morales walks toward her silver Honda Civic, a canvas bag full of ungraded essays slung over her shoulder. She's thinking about irregular verbs and whether Miguel Rodriguez will finally turn in his overdue assignment. Her keys are already in her hand. She doesn't notice the white Econoline van idling 3 rows over, engine running, windows tinted dark. What happens next takes 14 seconds. 6 men emerge from the van with practiced efficiency. No running, no shouting, just purposeful movement that speaks of planning and repetition. Elena sees them at second 7. Recognition flashes across her face, not of the individuals but of what they represent. The tattoos, the coordinated movement, the dead eyes of men who've done this before. MS-13. She turns to run at second 9. She makes it 4 steps. Strong hands grab her arms at second 12. Her bag hits the pavement at second 13. At second 14, she's inside the van, a hand clamped over her mouth, and they're already moving. 3 students witness it from the second-floor hallway. They freeze, instinct telling them that getting involved means becoming targets. But one of them, Maria Hernandez, 17 years old, Elena's former ESL student, pulls out her phone and dials 911. Then she makes a second call, to a number Elena had given the entire class on the first day of school. "If anything ever happens to me," Elena had said, "call this number. It's my father." What MS-13 didn't know, what their intelligence had catastrophically failed to uncover, was that Elena Morales wasn't just a teacher who helped immigrant kids with English homework. She was the daughter of Detective John Morales, a man who'd spent 28 years with the NYPD, the last 12 specifically targeting gang violence. She was the person who'd been documenting MS-13 recruitment patterns for 3 years, who knew their hierarchy better than some of their own members, who'd created an informal network of families willing to stand against gang intimidation. They'd just kidnapped the one person in Brentwood who could mobilize an entire community against them. And they had no idea. The woman they took. Elena Maria Morales was born in Brooklyn in 1990, the daughter of a cop and a social worker. Her childhood was spent in a world of contrasts. Her father's stories of street justice and her mother's work with immigrant families seeking asylum. She grew up bilingual, speaking English at school and Spanish at home, understanding from an early age that language was power, and that the ability to translate between worlds was a gift. She was 11 years old when her uncle, her mother's younger brother, was killed in a gang shooting in Washington Heights. Wrong place, wrong time. Caught in crossfire between 2 crews fighting over 3 blocks of territory. Elena remembered the funeral, remembered her mother's silent tears and her father's granite expression. She remembered him saying, "The only thing evil needs to win is for good people to do nothing." That moment shaped everything that came after. Elena graduated from CONI with a degree in education and a minor in Spanish literature. She could have taught anywhere. Her grades were excellent, her recommendations glowing. But she chose Roosevelt High School in Brentwood specifically because it served one of the largest Central American immigrant populations on Long Island. She knew the statistics. Suffolk County had become a primary battleground for MS-13 expansion, with the gang targeting newly arrived teenagers who were vulnerable, disconnected, and desperate to belong. She started teaching ESL in 2016, and within 6 months she'd identified the pattern. Boys would arrive eager to learn, then gradually withdraw. They'd show up with new clothes, new phones, evasive about where the money came from. They'd miss classes, then disappear entirely. Some would return weeks later with fresh tattoos and dead eyes. Others never came back at all. Elena began documenting everything. Not officially. She wasn't law enforcement. But in a private database she maintained on an encrypted laptop. Student names, behavior changes, known gang affiliations, family contacts, intervention attempts. By 2024, that database contained information on 73 students across 8 years. She'd shared portions of it with the Suffolk County Gang Violence Task Force through her father, always careful to protect student identities while providing actionable intelligence. She'd saved 11 kids from recruitment, Confirmed saves where she'd worked with families to relocate or intervene before the gang's grip became permanent. Those 11 kids went to college, got jobs, escaped. MS-13 knew about her. They had to. But they'd never made a direct move until now. Elena was 34 years old, 5'6", with dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and reading glasses she wore for grading papers. She drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it. She made $68,000 a year teaching, supplemented by summer tutoring that brought in another $8,000. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Bayshore, rent-controlled at $2,400 per month. She was engaged to Michael Chen, a civil engineer she'd met through a community organizing event 3 years earlier. They were planning a wedding for next summer. She had never fired a gun, never been in a physical fight, never imagined herself as someone who'd need to know self-defense. But her father had taught her something more valuable than combat skills. He'd taught her how systems work, how to document evidence, how to build networks, how to think tactically about problems, how to never ever give up. The gang had grabbed her because they saw her influence growing. Parents trusted her. Students listened to her. She'd testified at a school board meeting about increasing security funding. She'd been featured in Newsday for her work helping immigrant families navigate the asylum process. She represented everything MS-13 despised: legitimacy, authority, and a bridge to law enforcement cooperation. What they didn't understand was that taking her wouldn't break the community's will. It would crystallize it. The detective's daughter, John Morales, received Maria Hernandez's call at 3:47 p.m., 5 minutes after the abduction. He was in his home office in Ronkonkoma, reviewing cold cases for a consulting gig with the Suffolk County DA's office. Retirement hadn't suited him. At 62, he still needed the work, still needed to feel useful. When his phone rang with an unknown number, his first instinct was to ignore it. Something made him answer. "Mr. Morales? Detective Morales? This is Maria Hernandez. I was in Miss Morales's ESL class. They took her. Right now from the school parking lot. A white van, 6 men, MS-13. I saw the tattoos. I called 911, but I'm calling you because she always said if anything happened." John was already moving. "Where are you right now, Maria?" "Second floor hallway, Roosevelt High School. I'm scared. They might come back. Get to the principal's office. Stay with adults. Don't go anywhere alone. I'm calling this in through proper channels and I'm on my way. You did exactly right, Maria. Exactly right." He hung up and immediately dialed Detective Sarah Chen with the Suffolk County Gang Violence Task Force. She answered on the first ring. "Sarah, it's John Morales. MS-13 just grabbed my daughter from Roosevelt High School. White van, 6 suspects, happened at approximately 3:42 p.m. Witness is secure. I need everything. Bolo, helicopter, roadblocks, the full response. Now." There was a pause. Then, "John, I'm so sorry. We're on it. Every unit in the county is about to get the call. But you need to understand. You cannot be part of this investigation. You're the victim's father. You know the rules. I know the rules. I also know you'll need everything I have on MS-13 operations in this area. Elena's been documenting their recruitment patterns for 3 years. I've got her files. You're going to want them. Send them to my secure email. Everything. And John, we'll find her, I promise you." John Morales had made a lot of promises during his 28 years with the NYPD. He'd kept most of them, but he knew better than most that promises in law enforcement were aspirational, not guaranteed. MS-13 didn't play by rules. They killed witnesses, eliminated loose ends, and used terror as a business model. His daughter had become a loose end. He opened his safe, a Browning Pro Steel with biometric lock, and removed his service weapon, a Glock 19 he'd carried for 15 years before retirement. It was still registered, still legal, still loaded. He chambered a round, holstered the weapon, and grabbed his jacket. Then he opened his laptop and forwarded Elena's entire encrypted database to Detective Chen. 73 student profiles, gang hierarchy charts, safe house locations, known associates, communication patterns. Everything his daughter had compiled. Then he made a call that wasn't official, wasn't legal, and would probably end his consulting relationship with the DA's office. He called Miguel Mike Santos, a former MS-13 member who'd flipped informant 8 years ago after his younger sister was killed in gang crossfire. Mike now ran a youth outreach program in Central Islip, helping kids escape gang life. He had connections inside MS-13 that no cop could access. Mike, it's John Morales. They took Elena. I need to know who ordered it, where they're holding her, and what the play is. I need to know in the next 2 hours, not 2 days. Mike's voice was quiet, careful. John, if I start asking questions, people will notice. They'll know someone's looking. I don't care if they notice. My daughter's life is on a clock. You owe me, Mike. I kept you alive when every gang in Suffolk County wanted you dead. I'm calling that marker now. Another pause. Then, I'll make calls. But John, this is big. Taking a teacher in broad daylight from a school? That's not random violence, that's a message. Someone high up ordered this. Which means they're either going to ransom her or kill her as an example. I know. That's why I need information now. Call me back. John grabbed his keys and headed for the door. His wife, Elena's mother, was at a hospital board meeting in Stony Brook and didn't know yet. He'd call her from the car. First, he needed to get to Roosevelt High School, assess the scene, and start building the picture. Officially, he had no authority. Unofficially, he had 28 years of experience, a network of contacts across every law enforcement agency on Long Island, and the kind of focused rage that made him dangerous. MS-13 had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They'd taken his daughter thinking it would intimidate the community. Instead, they'd just activated a network of people who'd spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Parents who'd watched Elena save their children, former students who owed her everything, community organizers who'd worked alongside her, and one retired detective who knew exactly how MS-13 operated and exactly how to hurt them. The network activates by 4:15 p.m., 33 minutes after the abduction. The response was already exceeding anything MS-13 could have anticipated. Maria Hernandez's 911 call had triggered a full county-wide alert. Every patrol unit in Suffolk County had descriptions of the van, the suspects, and Elena. A helicopter was airborne. Roadblocks were being established on major thoroughfares. The FBI's Long Island Gang Task Force was being briefed. But that was the official response. The unofficial response was something else entirely. Maria Hernandez hadn't just called 911 and Detective Morales. She'd also posted in a private WhatsApp group that Elena had created 3 years earlier, a group of 47 students and former students who'd been part of Elena's ESL classes. Within minutes, that group exploded with activity. Students forwarded the news to parents. Parents called friends. Community leaders mobilized their networks. Within an hour, over 200 people knew that Elena Morales had been taken by MS-13, and they weren't waiting for law enforcement to handle it. Father Miguel Ortega, the priest at St. Anne's Catholic Church in Brentwood, received a call at 4:20 p.m. from one of his parishioners. Elena had helped the woman's son avoid gang recruitment 2 years ago. The kid was now at Nassau Community College studying engineering. Father Ortega immediately canceled evening mass and opened the church for an emergency community meeting. By 5 p.m., 80 people had gathered in the sanctuary. Teresa Gomez, who ran a community center in Central Islip, started making calls to every organization she knew: legal aid societies, immigrant rights groups, youth outreach programs. She'd worked with Elena on countless interventions, knew her methods, respected her courage. Within 90 minutes, she'd coordinated a network of volunteers to canvass neighborhoods, knock on doors, and ask questions that police couldn't legally ask. Carlos Mendoza, a former student who was now a paralegal at a nonprofit law firm in Hauppauge, started compiling information. He knew Elena kept detailed records. He'd helped her organize the database. He also knew the database contained information about MS-13 operations that could be leveraged. He called Detective Morales and offered to help cross-reference any intelligence the police were developing. By 6 p.m., 2 hours and 18 minutes after the abduction, the community response had achieved something remarkable. They'd identified the white van. A bodega owner in North Bay Shore reported seeing a vehicle matching the description parked behind an abandoned warehouse on 5th Avenue. He'd noticed it because white vans weren't common in that neighborhood, and because the men who'd exited it had MS-13 tattoos visible on their necks. That information reached Detective Chen at 6:07 p.m. By 6:15 p.m., a tactical team was positioning around the warehouse. But they were too late. The van was there, abandoned, wiped clean. MS-13 had switched vehicles. They were following protocols, being professional. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated how fast information moves in a tight-knit immigrant community where trust networks operate faster than official channels. Before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city and state in the comments. This story happened in Long Island, but it could have been anywhere in America. I want to know where this channel reaches, and I want to hear from you throughout this story. At 7:23 p.m., 3 hours and 41 minutes after the abduction, Detective Morales' phone rang. Unknown number. He answered immediately. Detective Morales. The voice was electronically distorted, but the accent was clear. Central American Spanish, probably Salvadoran. We have your daughter. She's alive. She'll stay alive if you follow instructions exactly. John had been a cop long enough to know how to handle ransom calls. Stay calm. Keep them talking. Record everything. He pressed the record function on his phone and spoke carefully. I'm listening. $50,000 cash, unmarked bills. You have 24 hours. We'll call with delivery instructions. If we see police, she dies. If you try to track us, she dies. If anyone tries to be a hero, she dies. Do you understand? I understand. But I need proof of life. I need to know she's okay. There was a pause. Then Elena's voice, strained but controlled. Dad, I'm okay. They haven't hurt me. Don't do anything stupid. Please. The line went dead. John stood in his kitchen staring at his phone, his mind processing multiple layers of information simultaneously. $50,000. That was manageable. He had retirement savings, could liquidate investments if needed. But the money wasn't the point. MS-13 didn't kidnap people for $50,000. That amount was almost insultingly small for a gang that trafficked in millions through drug distribution and extortion. This wasn't about money. This was about sending a message. And the message was, we can take anyone, we can reach anyone, cooperate with law enforcement, and this happens to you. Which meant they were planning to kill Elena regardless of whether the ransom was paid. She knew too much. She documented too much. She represented too much resistance. From MS-13's perspective, she was a threat that needed eliminating. But they'd made their second catastrophic miscalculation of the day. They'd given him 24 hours. That was time. Time to gather intelligence. Time to mobilize resources. Time to prepare a response. John called Detective Chen and played her the recording. Then he called Mike Santos. Mike, they just made ransom demands. 50,000, 24 hours, which means this is either a straight kill after collection, or they're planning something bigger. I need to know which. Mike's voice was tight. John, I made calls. What I'm hearing, this wasn't a street-level decision. This came from leadership. Miguel Ramirez, the shot caller for Suffolk County operations. Word is he's been planning this for weeks. Your daughter embarrassed them. Every time she saved a kid from recruitment, that was a loss of income and status. They couldn't let it continue. So this is about making an example. Yeah. But here's the thing. There's resistance inside the organization. Some of the younger members think taking a teacher is bad strategy. It brings too much heat, too much attention. There's a split developing. Ramirez forced this through, but not everyone's on board. John processed that information. Internal discord was an opportunity. Can you work that? Can you feed information that intensifies the split? Maybe. But John, if they find out I'm involved, I'm dead. And so is my family. I know. I'm asking anyway. Because if we don't stop this in the next 24 hours, my daughter is dead. So I need you to decide right now. Are you in or out? There was a long pause. Then, I'm in. But you owe me more than one marker after this. I'll owe you everything. What do you need? Time to make calls. I'll have something for you by midnight. John hung up and looked at the clock. It was 7:47 p.m. Elena had been in MS-13 custody for 4 hours and 5 minutes. Statistically, kidnapping victims who weren't recovered in the first 24 hours had a survival rate that dropped exponentially with each passing hour. He had approximately 20 hours before the ransom deadline, less than a day to find his daughter and extract her from one of the most violent criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. He opened his laptop and started building a tactical plan. He'd need vehicles, weapons, communications equipment, and people willing to operate outside legal boundaries. He'd need intelligence on MS-13 safe houses, guard rotations, and response protocols. He'd need to coordinate with law enforcement without officially involving them. And he'd need to do all of this without MS-13 detecting the preparation. It was impossible. But John Morales had spent 28 years doing impossible things. He'd taken down drug networks, dismantled human trafficking operations, and put away dozens of gang members. He'd survived 3 shootings, 2 stabbings, and 1 attempt to run him over with a stolen car. He'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and kept going anyway. This was different. This was personal. This was his daughter. He picked up his phone and started making calls. Added 2. The confrontation. The hunt begins by 9 p.m. John Morales had assembled a team that existed in the gray zone between legal and illegal, between official and unauthorized, between law enforcement and vigilante justice. They met in a back room at St. Anne's Church, neutral territory that Father Ortega had offered after John explained the situation. 7 people sat around a folding table covered with maps, photographs, and printouts. John knew each of them, trusted each of them, and understood that what he was about to propose could end careers and result in criminal charges. "Thank you all for coming," John said. "I'm going to be direct. My daughter has been kidnapped by MS-13. They've demanded ransom, but I believe they intend to kill her regardless. Official law enforcement is working the case through proper channels, but those channels are slow and bureaucratic. I'm not willing to wait. I'm going to find her and extract her using whatever means necessary. I'm not asking anyone here to break the law. I'm asking for information, logistical support, and backup if things go wrong. If you want to leave right now, no judgment. But if you stay, you're committing to a course of action that has significant legal and personal risk." No one left. Detective Sarah Chen from the Suffolk County Gang Violence Task Force spoke first. "John, you know I can't officially support this. But unofficially I can make sure our tactical teams are positioned to respond rapidly if you call for backup. I can also make sure certain information finds its way to you through unofficial channels." Marcus Williams, a former Army Ranger, who now ran a security consulting firm, nodded. "I've got night vision equipment, tactical radios, and body armor. I can also bring 3 former operators who know how to move quietly and handle themselves in close quarters. We'll function as your extraction team if you locate her." Teresa Gomez from the community center raised her hand. "I've got volunteers canvassing every neighborhood in Suffolk County where MS-13 operates. We're showing Elena's photo, asking questions, following up on any sightings. If she's being held in a residential location, we'll find it." Father Ortega leaned forward. "The church network extends across Long Island. Every priest, every deacon, every community volunteer is now looking for information. We're also providing sanctuary for anyone who comes forward with intelligence. MS-13 can't touch someone inside a church without causing problems they don't want." Carlos Mendoza, the paralegal, opened his laptop. "I've cross-referenced every property associated with known MS-13 members or sympathizers. There are 43 potential locations where they could be holding her. I've mapped them all, including satellite imagery and street views. We can start narrowing the list based on security requirements and access patterns." Mike Santos appeared on a video call, his face shadowed to protect his identity. "I've been making calls. What I'm hearing, Elena is being held at one of 3 locations. I don't have specifics yet, but I'm working my sources. By midnight, I should have better information." "But John, they're planning to move her before the ransom deadline. Standard protocol is to keep hostages mobile to prevent exactly what you're planning." John absorbed all of this. "Then we have less time than I thought. If they move her, we lose the trail. We need to identify the current location within the next 6 hours and execute extraction before dawn. That's an aggressive timeline, but it's what we have." He spread a map of Suffolk County across the table. "Carlos, I need you to prioritize those 43 locations based on isolation, accessibility, and recent activity. Cross-reference with any intelligence Sarah can provide through unofficial channels. Teresa, coordinate your volunteers to focus surveillance on the top 10 locations." Marcus, start positioning your team for rapid deployment. I need everyone ready to move by 3 a.m. What about the ransom? Sarah asked. Are you going to make contact when they call back? Yes. I'll stall, negotiate, buy time, but I'm not paying ransom for a corpse. We find her, we extract her, and we do it before they expect any move. Father Ortega spoke quietly. John, I understand the urgency, but you need to consider what happens after. If you go in with force, people may die. MS-13 will retaliate against the community. There will be consequences that extend beyond your daughter. John met his eyes. Father, with all respect, they took my daughter to terrorize this community. If we submit to that terror, it never ends. Every teacher, every community leader, every person who stands against them becomes a target. This is about more than Elena. This is about whether we let evil operate unchecked because we're afraid of consequences. I'm not afraid, and I think this community has shown it's not afraid either. Father Ortega nodded slowly. Then may God guide your actions and protect the innocent. The meeting broke up at 10:15 p.m. John stayed behind with Sarah Chen, who had additional information she couldn't share in front of the others. John, the FBI is officially involved now. They want to handle this through negotiation protocols. They're bringing in a hostage negotiator and they want you to stand down. That's not happening. I know. But you need to understand. If this goes wrong, if civilians die, if there's a shootout in a residential neighborhood, the FBI will come after you, and I won't be able to protect you. I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking for time and space to do what needs to be done. Sarah handed him a folder. These are surveillance photos from the past 6 months. MS-13 operations, known associates, vehicle registrations. Officially, I'm not giving you this. Unofficially, it's everything we have. Use it well. John took the folder. Thank you, Sarah. I mean it. Bring her home, John. Just bring her home. Elena's captivity. While her father was building an extraction team, Elena Morales was conducting her own form of resistance. She'd been moved twice since the initial abduction, first to a house in North Bay Shore, then to a basement apartment in Wyandanch. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her, her ankles bound with rope. 2 guards rotated shifts, watching her constantly. They hadn't physically harmed her beyond the initial restraint, but the psychological pressure was intense. Elena had spent the first hour cycling through panic, forcing herself to breathe slowly and think clearly. She'd remembered her father's advice from years ago when she'd asked him what to do if she was ever in danger. Don't fight unless you can win. Observe everything. Information is power. And never ever give up. So she observed. The guards were young, early 20s, probably recent recruits still proving themselves to the organization. They spoke Spanish with Salvadoran accents, used MS-13 slang, and were armed with handguns they wore openly. One was nervous, checking his phone constantly. The other was overconfident, making jokes about what would happen to her if the ransom wasn't paid. Neither was particularly intelligent or professional. The location was a basement apartment in a multifamily house. She could hear footsteps above, children playing, a television blaring. The walls were thin. There was one window, small and high, covered with boards from the outside. One door leading to stairs going up. The floor was concrete, cold. There was a bathroom attached. They'd allowed her to use it twice, always with a guard outside the door. She noted the time changes by the light coming through gaps in the boarded window. It was dark now. Evening, probably around 9 p.m. based on the sounds of dinner being prepared upstairs. She'd been in captivity for approximately 5.5 hours. The nervous guard, she'd heard the other one call him Flaco, was checking his phone again. She decided to try establishing communication. "Can I have some water?" she asked in Spanish. Flaco looked at her, hesitated, then nodded. He got a bottle of water from a small refrigerator, opened it, and brought it to her. He held it while she drank since her hands were zip-tied. "Thank you," she said. He didn't respond, just went back to his position by the door. Elena waited 5 minutes, then tried again. "I need to use the bathroom." The overconfident guard, Gordo, laughed. "Already? You just went an hour ago." "I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Please." Gordo sighed dramatically but unlocked the bathroom door. 2 minutes. And we're right outside. Elena used the bathroom, then spent an additional minute examining the small space. No windows, a toilet, a sink, a shower stall. The mirror was polished metal, not glass. The sink was ceramic but bolted securely. Nothing she could use as a weapon or tool. She washed her hands, noting that the hot water worked, which meant the building's utilities were functional, which meant this wasn't an abandoned property. When she emerged, Gordo zip-tied her hands again, tighter this time. She winced but didn't complain. She needed them to see her as compliant, unthreatening. At 10:30 p.m., a third man arrived. He was older, 40s, heavily tattooed, with the kind of presence that signaled authority. Flacco and Gordo immediately straightened, became more alert. This was someone important. The man studied Elena for a long moment. When he spoke, his Spanish was educated, precise. "Miss Morales, I apologize for the accommodation. I'm told you've been cooperative. That's good. It makes the situation easier for everyone." Elena met his eyes. "Who are you?" "You can call me Miguel. I'm the person who ordered your temporary relocation. I want you to understand something. This isn't personal. You're an intelligent woman. You understand how business works. You've been interfering with our recruitment operations. That's bad for business. This action is simply a correction, a message to the community that certain behaviors have consequences. Kidnapping a teacher from a school parking lot in broad daylight seems like a disproportionate response to someone helping kids learn English." Miguel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You weren't just helping kids learn English. You were documenting our operations, sharing intelligence with law enforcement, actively recruiting families away from our influence. You made yourself a problem. Problems get solved." Elena felt her pulse accelerate but kept her voice steady. "So what happens now? You collect ransom from my father, and then what?" "That depends on many factors. Your father's cooperation, the community's response, whether this situation escalates or resolves quietly. I'd prefer the latter. You seem like a reasonable person. I'm a reasonable person. Maybe we can find a reasonable solution. The reasonable solution is you let me go. Unfortunately, that's not an option. You know too much. You've seen too much. Even if we reached an accommodation, you'd remain a threat. So we need to find a different kind of solution." The implication was clear. Elena felt ice in her stomach but forced herself to keep talking. "If you're planning to kill me regardless of ransom, my father won't cooperate. He's a retired detective. He knows how this works." Miguel nodded. "Yes, I'm aware of your father's background, which is why the situation is delicate. If he responds predictably, through official channels, negotiation, ransom payment, this can end with minimal additional violence. If he responds unpredictably, through direct action, vigilante behavior, then the situation escalates and more people die, including you." He stood. "I want you to think about that. Think about whether your father is the kind of man who follows rules or breaks them when his daughter's life is at stake. Because that choice will determine whether you leave here alive or in a body bag." Miguel left. Flacco and Gordo resumed their positions. Elena sat on the cold concrete floor and fought to control her breathing. She'd learned 3 critical things from that conversation. First, Miguel was intelligent and calculating, not the typical street-level enforcer. Second, they were genuinely uncertain about how her father would respond, which meant they didn't have complete intelligence on him. Third, they were expecting either ransom payment or direct action, but not both simultaneously. That uncertainty was an opening. A small one, but an opening nonetheless. Elena started planning. She couldn't physically overpower 2 armed guards. She couldn't escape through a boarded window or a locked door, but she could create opportunities. She could be ready when those opportunities emerged, and she could trust that her father, the man who'd never given up on anything in his entire life, was coming for her. She just needed to survive, until he arrived. The intelligence breakthrough. At 11:47 p.m., Mike Santos called John Morales with information that changed everything. "John, I've got a location. Not confirmed, but strong probability. Basement apartment at 127 Straight Path in Wyandanch. It's a multi-family house owned by a cousin of Miguel Ramirez, the MS-13 shot caller I mentioned. Normally, they don't use properties with direct family connections, but they needed someplace secure on short notice. My source says they moved Elena there around 6 p.m. after ditching the original safe house. John was already pulling up satellite imagery on his laptop. What's the security situation? 2 guards inside with Elena. Unknown how many in the main house above. The neighborhood is tight. Lots of eyes, lots of people who'll call MS-13 if they see police activity. You'll need to go in quiet, fast, and with enough force to handle resistance. What about Ramirez? Is he there? No. He visited earlier tonight but left. He's staying mobile, avoiding fixed locations in case law enforcement moves against him. John studied the satellite view. The house was on a residential street, densely packed with other homes. A frontal assault would be noticed immediately. But there was an alley behind the property, and the basement apartment appeared to have a rear entrance, a small door leading to a utility area. Mike, I need one more thing. When is Elena scheduled to be moved again? 4 a.m. They're transferring her to a different location before dawn. After that, I lose visibility. If you're going to move, it needs to be before 4 a.m. John checked the time. It was 11:52 p.m. He had 4 hours and 8 minutes. He called Marcus Williams. I've got a location we're executing at 3 a.m. That gives us 3 hours to prepare and position. Can your team be ready? We're already staged and equipped. Send me the address and tactical plan. John called Detective Chen. Sarah, I've got actionable intelligence on Elena's location. I'm sharing it with you, but I'm also going in. I need you to have tactical teams ready to respond if this goes wrong, but don't move in unless I call. If MS-13 sees police, they'll kill her immediately. John, this is insane. You're talking about a hostage rescue operation with no official authorization, in a residential neighborhood against armed suspects. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've done tactical entries 100 times. So has Marcus and his team. We'll go in quiet, extract Elena, and be gone before MS-13 can organize a response. Your team stay back as emergency backup only. Sarah was silent for a moment. Then, God help us all, I'll position units 2 blocks out. But John, if this goes bad, I can't protect you from the consequences. I'm not asking you to. Just be ready to respond if we need you. At 12:30 a.m., John met with Marcus Williams and his 3-man extraction team in the parking lot of a closed shopping center in Deer Park. They were all former military, 2 Army Rangers, and 1 Marine Force recon. They wore dark tactical clothing, carried suppressed weapons, and had the quiet competence of men who'd done dangerous things in dangerous places. Marcus spread blueprints of the house across the hood of his truck. Based on building permits and tax records, the basement apartment has 2 entry points, front stairs leading to the main door, and rear access through a utility entrance. I recommend we breach the rear. It's more isolated, less visible from the street. 2-man entry team, 2 providing rear security. John, you're not trained for tactical entry. You stay with rear security and move in once we've secured the initial breach. John wanted to argue, but recognized the logic. Agreed. What's the extraction plan? Fast and clean. We breach, neutralize threats, secure Elena, and exit through the rear to vehicles staged in the alley. Total time from breach to extraction, 90 seconds. If we encounter resistance we can't immediately overcome, we call in police backup and transition to a barricade situation. But the goal is speed. Get in, get her, get out before MS-13 can respond. What about civilians in the main house? That's the risk factor. If they're uninvolved, we avoid contact. If they're MS-13 associates who engage, we respond appropriately. Rules of engagement are clear. We use force only as necessary to protect Elena and ourselves. This is a rescue operation, not a raid. John nodded. Weapons? Suppressed pistols primary. Carbines for the entry team. Non-lethal options, including flashbangs and tear gas if we need to clear rooms quickly. We're equipped for a dynamic entry against armed opposition in a confined space. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. They spent the next 90 minutes rehearsing the entry sequence, reviewing contingencies, and checking equipment. At 2:45 a.m., they moved to the target location. The extraction. The neighborhood was quiet at 2:55 a.m., the dead hour when even insomniacs were asleep, and shift workers hadn't yet started their morning routines. Marcus's team moved through the alley behind 127 straight path with tactical precision, night vision goggles turning darkness into green-lit clarity. John stayed 20 feet back with the rear security element, his Glock drawn but pointed at low ready. His heart was hammering, not from fear but from controlled adrenaline, the familiar pre-action state he'd experienced hundreds of times during his police career. This was different because Elena was inside, but the mechanics were the same. Control breathing, focus on the mission, trust your training. Marcus and his lead breacher reached the rear utility door. It was metal, but old, probably original to the 1970s construction. The breacher placed a small hydraulic jack against the frame and began applying pressure. Metal creaked softly. The frame bent. 30 seconds later, the door swung open. The entry team flowed inside. Marcus first, then the breacher, moving in practiced coordination. John heard suppressed weapon reports. 2 quick shots, the distinctive pop hiss of suppressed 9mm fire. Then, silence. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. Marcus's voice came over the tactical radio. Interior secure. 2 hostiles down. Package located. We're coming out. Relief flooded through John so intensely he felt momentarily dizzy. She was alive. They had her. Marcus emerged first, weapon up, scanning for threats. Behind him came Elena, supported by the breacher. Her hands were still zip-tied, her clothes disheveled, but she was walking under her own power. Behind them came the second operator, covering their withdrawal. John moved forward, fighting every instinct to run to his daughter. Not yet. Not until they were secure. The team moved quickly to the vehicles. 2 SUVs parked in the alley with engines running. Elena was placed in the rear of the first vehicle. John climbed in beside her as Marcus took the driver's seat. Go, Marcus said calmly. Both vehicles accelerated smoothly out of the alley. Only then did John allow himself to look at Elena. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes were clear. He used his pocket knife to cut the zip ties. Dad? Her voice broke. He pulled her into a hug. You're safe. You're safe now. They drove to a predetermined location, a parking garage in Hauppauge where Detective Chen was waiting with an ambulance and tactical support units. As soon as the vehicles stopped, paramedics descended on Elena, checking vitals and injuries. She had bruises on her wrists from the restraints and minor scrapes, but nothing serious. Detective Chen approached John. You got lucky. The guards didn't have time to radio for help before your team neutralized them. MS-13 doesn't know yet that Elena's been extracted. But they will within the hour, and when they do, they're going to retaliate. John nodded. I know. How do we handle this? Officially, this was a police tactical operation. Your involvement will be documented but downplayed. We'll spin it as intelligence-led law enforcement action. The 2 suspects you neutralized were armed and presented an imminent threat, so the shooting is legally defensible. But John, this doesn't end here. Miguel Ramirez is going to come after your family. You need protection. I can protect my family. Not against MS-13. They'll hit you at home, at work, anywhere they can find you. You need to relocate Elena and your wife immediately, and you need to stay in protective custody until we can roll up Ramirez and his entire operation. John looked at Elena, who was being examined by paramedics. She caught his eye and gave a small nod. She understood what needed to happen. Okay, John said, but I want to be part of taking down Ramirez. He took my daughter. I want to see him in custody. Sarah smiled grimly. I think that can be arranged. Stop here for a second. John just made a choice most parents will never face. Take violent action or trust official channels that might be too slow. There's no easy answer to whether he did the right thing. What would you do? Not what you think you'd do. What would you actually do in that moment? Think about it. Comment below. Let's have a real conversation about this. Act T3. The aftermath. Immediate consequences. By 5 a.m., the situation had evolved from rescue operation to full-scale law enforcement crackdown. The FBI, working with Suffolk County PD and the Gang Violence Task Force, executed simultaneous raids on 14 MS-13 associated locations across Long Island. They arrested 23 gang members, seized 17 weapons, and recovered over $200,000 in cash and narcotics. Miguel Ramirez wasn't among those arrested. He'd gone to ground the moment he learned Elena had been extracted, disappearing into the network of safe houses and sympathetic locations that MS-13 maintained across the New York metropolitan area. Elena was placed under protective custody in an undisclosed location, a safe house in Nassau County maintained by the FBI for high-value witnesses. Her mother joined her there, as did her fiancé, Michael. They were assigned a protective detail, 2 armed agents rotating 12-hour shifts. The FBI estimated they'd need to remain there for at least 2 weeks, while law enforcement dismantled MS-13's Long Island operations. John refused protective custody for himself. He told Detective Chen he was staying operational, helping hunt Ramirez. In truth, he wanted to be bait. He wanted Ramirez to come after him, because that would provide an opportunity to finish this. The community response was overwhelming. News of Elena's kidnapping and rescue spread rapidly through Brentwood, Central Islip, and surrounding areas. Vigils were held at Roosevelt High School and St. Anne's Church. Parents organized volunteer security patrols. Students created a scholarship fund in Elena's name. The message was clear. MS-13's attempt at intimidation had backfired catastrophically. But there was also fear. MS-13 had a long memory and a reputation for brutal retaliation. Families worried about reprisals. Community leaders hired security. Schools increased police presence. The short-term victory had created long-term anxiety. On the 3rd day after Elena's rescue, Father Ortega called a community meeting at St. Anne's. Over 300 people attended. Parents, students, business owners, clergy, law enforcement representatives. The question on everyone's mind: what happens next? Father Ortega stood at the front of the sanctuary. We've reached a moment of decision as a community. MS-13 attempted to terrorize us by taking Elena Morales. That attempt failed because we stood together. But the gang is still out there. Miguel Ramirez is still free. And we need to decide, do we return to fear and silence, or do we continue standing together? Teresa Gomez spoke up from the audience. MS-13 operates on fear. They can only control communities that are afraid to resist. If we back down now, every gang member will know they can intimidate us. But if we stay united, if we keep cooperating with law enforcement, if we keep protecting our children, they lose power. A parent stood. Easy to say when your daughter wasn't kidnapped. My son is in Elena's class. What if they come for him next? What if standing together just makes my family a target? John Morales, sitting in the back, stood up. I understand your fear. My daughter was taken. I know what it's like to feel powerless. But here's what I learned. MS-13 is strong when we're divided and afraid. They're vulnerable when we work together. In the past 3 days, law enforcement has arrested 23 gang members, shut down 4 safe houses, and seized a significant portion of their Long Island operations. That happened because people in this room provided information, because community members observed and reported, because we refused to be silent. If we stop now, all that progress disappears. The meeting continued for 2 hours. People shared stories, expressed fears, debated approaches. By the end, a consensus emerged. The community would continue cooperating with law enforcement, but with enhanced security measures and protective protocols. No one would stand alone. Everyone would look out for each other. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a commitment, a collective decision to resist rather than submit. The hunt for Ramirez. Miguel Ramirez remained at large for 11 days. During that time, he communicated with MS-13 leadership in El Salvador, received new instructions, and planned his next move. The organization was divided on strategy. Some members wanted to retaliate immediately and violently, while others argued that increased law enforcement pressure made continued operations in Suffolk County untenable. Ramirez favored retaliation. In his view, allowing a teacher's rescue to go unanswered would signal weakness throughout MS-13's North American network. Other communities would be emboldened to resist. Recruitment would suffer. Revenue would decline. The organization's reputation for ruthless efficiency would be damaged. He planned an attack targeting John Morales, a message killing that would demonstrate MS-13's reach and resolve. But he needed to be careful. Law enforcement was actively hunting him, and every MS-13 associate was potentially under surveillance. On day 12 after Elena's rescue, Ramirez made a mistake. He called a meeting with 3 trusted lieutenants at a diner in Ronkonkoma, neutral territory, public location, low probability of law enforcement monitoring. What he didn't know was that Mike Santos, the former MS-13 informant, had tracked him through sources inside the organization and passed that information to Detective Chen. At 2:30 p.m. on November 1st, 2024, as Ramirez and his lieutenants sat in a booth discussing tactics, 6 FBI agents and 4 Suffolk County detectives executed a coordinated arrest. Ramirez tried to run, but was tackled in the parking lot by an agent who'd been positioned specifically for that contingency. He was charged with kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and 14 other felonies. His bail was set at $5 million, an amount MS-13 could have paid but chose not to, signaling that Ramirez had lost organizational support. John Morales watched the arrest from an unmarked car parked across the street. He'd been part of the surveillance team tracking Ramirez for 11 days, operating in a semi-official capacity as a consultant to the Gang Violence Task Force. When Ramirez was placed in the back of a police cruiser, John felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't over. Ramirez would face trial, might be acquitted, might continue directing operations from prison. MS-13 would continue existing, recruiting, operating. But this particular chapter was closed. Elena was safe. The community had held together. And one of Long Island's most dangerous gang leaders was in custody facing life in prison. Detective Chen met John in the parking lot after the arrest. "It's done. Ramirez is going away for a long time. The DA has enough evidence to convict on kidnapping alone, and the feds are building a RICO case that'll bury him." John nodded. "What about the others? His lieutenants?" "Rolled over within hours. They're cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences. We've identified 47 MS-13 members operating in Suffolk County, and we're building cases against every single one. This organization won't recover from this, not here, not for years. They'll rebuild, gangs always do. Maybe, but not with the same impunity. This community saw what happens when people stand together. That lesson lasts longer than any individual gang member." John looked at the police cruiser pulling away with Ramirez inside. "I want to see Elena. How soon can she come out of protective custody?" "Another week minimum. We need to be certain there's no residual threat." "But John, she can't go back to teaching at Roosevelt." "Not yet, maybe not ever. She's too high profile now. MS-13 will mark her as a target permanently." John had already considered that. "We'll figure it out. The important thing is she's alive. Everything else is manageable." The trial, Miguel Ramirez's trial, began 4 months later in March 2025. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Testimony from Elena about her kidnapping and captivity, forensic evidence from the basement apartment in Wyandanch, phone records connecting Ramirez to the operation, and testimony from 3 cooperating witnesses who detailed MS-13's decision-making process. The defense argued that Ramirez had no direct involvement in the kidnapping, that he was a businessman who happened to have family connections to people involved in criminal activity. They portrayed him as a scapegoat, targeted by law enforcement because they couldn't dismantle MS-13's broader network. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Ramirez was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. His 3 lieutenants received sentences ranging from 15 to 20 years. Elena attended the sentencing hearing. It was the first time she'd seen Ramirez since the night he'd visited her in captivity. When the judge asked if she wanted to make a victim impact statement, she walked to the podium with steady steps. "Miguel Ramirez tried to make me afraid," she said. "He tried to make my community afraid. He believed that violence and intimidation were tools of power. But he was wrong. Real power comes from people choosing to stand together even when they're scared. Real power comes from refusing to accept that gangs can control our neighborhoods, recruit our children, and terrorize our families. Miguel Ramirez spent his life building an organization based on fear. In 14 seconds on a Thursday afternoon, he destroyed that organization by targeting someone who represented everything his gang couldn't understand: community, education, and hope." She looked directly at Ramirez. "You failed. Not just legally, not just tactically. You failed morally. You took a teacher because you were afraid of what she represented. And in doing so, You proved that MS-13 isn't strong. It's desperate. It's dying. And communities like mine will keep resisting until it's gone." Ramirez stared back with dead eyes showing no emotion. But Elena saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe, or the dawning understanding that his attempt to create fear had instead created resolve. The judge thanked Elena for her statement, then addressed Ramirez. "You represent a particularly corrosive form of criminal enterprise, one that preys on vulnerable communities, exploits immigrant families, and uses terror as a business model. This court sentences you to 35 years in federal custody, with the recommendation that you serve the entirety of your sentence without reduction. May you use that time to reflect on the lives you've destroyed and the communities you've harmed." Elena walked out of the courtroom with her father beside her. Outside, reporters swarmed with questions. She paused on the courthouse steps. "I don't want to be famous for being kidnapped," she said. "I want people to remember that communities are stronger than gangs, that education matters, that standing together works. MS-13 still exists and there will be other Miguel Ramirez's. But every time a community chooses resistance over submission, every time a family chooses cooperation over fear, these organizations lose power. That's the real story here." The footage went viral. Within 24 hours, Elena's statement had been viewed over 2 million times. Community organizations across the country reached out, asking her to speak about gang-resistant strategies. News outlets requested interviews. Publishers inquired about book deals. Elena declined most of it. She wasn't interested in being a celebrity. She just wanted to teach. The new normal. Elena didn't return to Roosevelt High School. The security risk was deemed too significant, and the psychological weight of returning to the place where she'd been kidnapped was something she wasn't ready to face. Instead, she accepted a position at Nassau Community College, teaching ESL to adult learners in a more controlled environment with enhanced security protocols. She married Michael Chen in June 2025, 6 months after the kidnapping. The ceremony was small, 50 people, held at St. Anne's Church with Father Ortega officiating. Detective Chen and Marcus Williams attended, as did dozens of former students. Mike Santos sent flowers anonymously, unable to attend because his informant status remained protected. John Morales officially retired from consulting work and focused on writing a book about gang violence and community resistance. It was published in 2026 under the title, "When Communities Fight Back: The MS-13 Case and the Power of Collective Action." The book became required reading in several criminal justice programs and was credited with influencing gang enforcement strategies across multiple jurisdictions. The Roosevelt High School community established the Elena Morales Scholarship Fund, providing college tuition assistance to immigrant students pursuing education degrees. In its first year, the fund raised over $300,000 and supported 12 students. Many of them were Elena's former ESL students, now attending college and planning to return to their communities as teachers. MS-13's Long Island operations never recovered to pre-arrest levels. The arrests, prosecutions, and community mobilization created an environment where gang recruitment became significantly more difficult. Suffolk County saw a 40% reduction in gang-related violence in the year following Ramirez's arrest, a decline that law enforcement attributed directly to increased community cooperation and intelligence sharing. But the story didn't have a purely happy ending. 3 families who'd cooperated with the investigation received death threats and were relocated through witness protection programs. 2 former MS-13 members who'd provided testimony were attacked. 1 survived, 1 didn't. A community center in Brentwood that had been active in anti-gang organizing was vandalized with spray-painted threats. Violence creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial incident. Elena understood this better than most. She spent months in therapy, processing PTSD symptoms that manifested as nightmares, hypervigilance, and anxiety attacks triggered by white vans or men with tattoos. Some days were good. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. Michael was patient, supportive, present. Her parents visited weekly. Former students sent cards and messages. The community that had mobilized to save her continued supporting her recovery. "People think trauma ends when the danger ends," Elena told her therapist during a session 9 months after the kidnapping. "But trauma lives in your body. It changes how you see the world. Every parking lot looks like a potential ambush. Every stranger with an accent makes me calculate escape routes. I know intellectually that I'm safe, but my nervous system hasn't gotten the message. Her therapist nodded. Recovery isn't linear. You'll have setbacks. But you're doing the work, building coping strategies, creating safety. That's all you can do. Elena started writing about her experience, not for publication, just for processing. She wrote about the 14 seconds of kidnapping, about the cold basement floor, about her father's face when he'd cut her zip ties. She wrote about fear and resilience, about community and isolation, about the cost of standing against evil. Some of those writings eventually became the basis for a curriculum she developed at Nassau Community College: Civic Courage and Community Organizing. The class explored how ordinary people confront extraordinary threats, examining case studies from civil rights movements, anti-gang organizing, and community resistance efforts. It became one of the most popular courses at the college, with waiting lists every semester. Reflections on Violence and Justice. 18 months after the kidnapping, a documentary filmmaker contacted Elena about participating in a project exploring gang violence and community resistance. Elena initially declined, but after reading the filmmaker's proposal and understanding the educational intent, she agreed to a limited interview. The interview took place in a neutral location, a conference room at Nassau Community College, with Michael present for support. The filmmaker asked thoughtful questions about the experience, the aftermath, and the broader implications. "Do you think your father did the right thing?" the filmmaker asked. "Organizing an unauthorized extraction operation instead of waiting for official channels?" Elena was quiet for a moment. That's the question everyone wants answered. Was it justified? Was it legal? Was it moral? The truth is complicated. My father broke rules. He organized what was essentially a vigilante operation. People could have died. Innocent people, civilians in that house, his team, me. From a legal standpoint, it was problematic at best. She paused. But from a daughter's standpoint? He saved my life. MS-13 wasn't planning to release me. The ransom was theater. They were going to kill me regardless. Official channels would have negotiated, followed protocols, and I would have been dead before they finished their first phone call. So was he right? I'm alive because of his choices. That's not nothing. Do you worry about the precedent it sets? Other families in similar situations might try similar actions with worse outcomes. Absolutely. That's the danger of exceptional circumstances. They create templates that don't generalize. My father was a trained detective with tactical experience and law enforcement connections. Most parents don't have those resources. If a typical family tries to mount a rescue operation against armed criminals, people die. So I don't want this story to be, take the law into your own hands. I want it to be, communities working together can resist criminal organizations. The rescue was one moment. The real victory was the community mobilization that happened before, during, and after. The filmmaker nodded. What about Miguel Ramirez? Do you have any sympathy for him? Elena considered that carefully. Sympathy? No. Understanding? Maybe. Ramirez grew up in El Salvador during the Civil War, was recruited into MS-13 as a teenager, spent his entire adult life in an organization that values violence and loyalty above everything else. He's a product of systems, poverty, war, gang culture, immigration enforcement that treats people like criminals before they've committed crimes. But understanding context doesn't excuse choices. Ramirez had opportunities to leave that life. He chose not to. He chose to build an organization that terrorizes vulnerable communities. He chose to kidnap a teacher. Those were his decisions, and he's facing consequences for them. Do you think 35 years is appropriate? I think it's what the law prescribes for his crimes. Is it justice? That depends on your definition. If justice means punishment and incapacitation, keeping him from harming others, then yes. If justice means restoration and rehabilitation, healing the harm caused, then no. Because no prison sentence restores what MS-13 took from communities. Real justice would be Ramirez spending 35 years teaching other former gang members how to leave that life using his experience to prevent recruitment, rebuilding what he destroyed. But our system doesn't work that way. The filmmaker asked one final question. If you could go back to October 16th, 2024, the day before the kidnapping, knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything about your work? Elena smiled sadly. That's a version of the trolley problem, isn't it? If I'd stopped documenting MS-13, stopped intervening with students, stayed silent and safe, I wouldn't have been kidnapped. But how many kids would have been recruited? How many families would have been terrorized? I helped 11 students escape gang recruitment before I was taken. Those 11 kids are alive, in school, building futures. If the price of their freedom was my 14 seconds of terror and 4 hours of captivity, would I pay it again? She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I would. Because the alternative is letting evil operate unopposed. And I can't live with that. Where they are now. It's November 2025 now, 13 months after Elena Morales was kidnapped from the Roosevelt High School parking lot. The story has faded from headlines, replaced by newer crises and fresher tragedies. But the ripples continue. Elena teaches 4 classes per semester at Nassau Community College. Her Civic Courage and Community Organizing course has a waiting list of 40 students. She still gets emails from former Roosevelt High School students, some asking for letters of recommendation, others just checking in, a few asking for help with relatives facing gang pressure. She responds to every single one. She and Michael bought a house in Garden City, a safe neighborhood with good schools, planning for the family they hope to start in the next few years. They installed a comprehensive security system. Elena carries pepper spray. She takes different routes to work each day. Some trauma responses become permanent safety protocols. John Morales finished his book and now works as a consultant for the Department of Justice, helping develop community-based gang resistance programs. He speaks at law enforcement conferences about the intersection of official action and community mobilization. He still carries his Glock 19, still checks his surroundings compulsively, still wakes up some nights replaying the extraction operation in his mind. Detective Sarah Chen was promoted to lieutenant, now overseeing the entire gang violence task force for Suffolk County. Gang-related arrests in her jurisdiction have increased 60% since October 2024, but gang-related violence has decreased 40%, exactly the outcome effective enforcement produces. She attributes the success to community cooperation, and she's right. Marcus Williams and his security consulting firm received contracts from 3 school districts implementing enhanced protection protocols. They train teachers in threat recognition, schools in lockdown procedures, administrators in crisis response. The work is steady and depressing. The fact that schools need such services is an indictment of society's failures. But the work is necessary, so they do it. Father Miguel Ortega continues leading St. Anne's Church in Brentwood. The sanctuary has become a community hub for anti-gang organizing, immigrant services, and youth programs. Attendance has increased 30% since October 2024. People are looking for community, for connection, for purpose beyond survival. Miguel Ramirez is incarcerated at FCI Allenwood in Pennsylvania, a medium-security federal prison. He spends 23 hours per day in a cell because of ongoing security concerns about MS-13's prison network. He's filed multiple appeals, all denied. He'll be eligible for release in 2059, when he's 73 years old. Statistically, he'll probably die in prison. MS-13 still exists. New recruiters replace arrested ones. New shot callers step up when leaders fall. The organization is resilient, adaptable, and deeply embedded in Central American immigrant communities. But in Suffolk County on Long Island, in the neighborhoods around Roosevelt High School, MS-13's power has been broken in ways that will take years to rebuild. And that's because a community decided that one teacher's life mattered enough to stand together. That calculation, the value of one life against the cost of resistance, is one that communities across America face constantly. Most choose silence, most choose safety, most choose to look away. Brentwood chose differently. And that choice changed everything. The deeper truth. 3 months after her interview with the documentary filmmaker, Elena gave a talk at a community organizing conference in Manhattan. She spoke to an audience of teachers, social workers, community leaders, and activists, people doing the difficult work of building resistance to violence in communities that have every reason to feel hopeless. "I want to talk about fear," she began. "Not the abstract concept of fear, but the physical reality of it. Fear is a neurological response. Your amygdala triggers, your sympathetic nervous system activates. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. You experience this as emotion, but it's actually a biochemical cascade designed to keep you alive. Fight, flight, or freeze." She paused. "When MS-13 operates in a community, they're weaponizing that response. They create fear deliberately, strategically, because fearful people don't resist. They don't testify. They don't cooperate with police. They don't intervene when they see recruitment happening. Fear is MS-13's most effective tool, more effective than violence, more effective than intimidation, because fear is self-sustaining. Once established, it perpetuates without requiring additional input. So how do you counter it? Not with courage. Courage is just fear plus action, and action without strategy is recklessness. You counter fear with three things: information, community, and commitment. Information means understanding the threat accurately. MS-13 is dangerous, but they're not omnipotent. They have weaknesses, limitations, vulnerabilities. They depend on community silence to operate. When people document their activities, share intelligence, and cooperate with law enforcement, MS-13's effectiveness drops dramatically. Information transforms abstract terror into concrete problems that can be solved. Community means never standing alone. MS-13 targets individuals because individuals are vulnerable. But when entire communities mobilize, when parents protect each other's children, when neighbors watch each other's homes, when teachers share information and strategies, the gang can't isolate targets. They can't divide and conquer. The math changes from one person against an organization to one organization against an entire community. That's a fight MS-13 can't win. And commitment means accepting that resistance has costs. People who stand against gangs face real risks. Some of those risks materialize. I was kidnapped. Others have been attacked, threatened, or killed. That's the brutal reality. But the alternative, submission, silence, allowing gangs to control entire communities, has costs too. Children lost to recruitment, families destroyed by violence, neighborhoods transformed into war zones. You have to decide which costs you're willing to accept. She looked out at the audience. "I can't tell you what to do. Every community is different. Every situation has unique factors. But I can tell you this. When I was in that basement, zip-tied and guarded by armed men who'd been ordered to kill me, what kept me from despair was knowing my community was mobilizing. I knew my father was coming. I knew former students were sharing information. I knew the network we'd built over 8 years was activating. I wasn't alone. And that knowledge, that certainty that I belonged to something larger than myself, made survival possible. MS-13 took me because they wanted to break that network. Instead, they proved how strong it was. That's the lesson. Not that vigilante rescues work. Mine was exceptional circumstances with exceptional resources. The lesson is that communities built on trust, information sharing, and mutual protection can withstand attacks that would destroy isolated individuals. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Afterwards, dozens of people approached with questions, requests for advice, stories of their own struggles against gang violence. Elena listened to each one, offered what guidance she could, and exchanged contact information for follow-up conversations. This was her work now. Not just teaching English to immigrant adults, but teaching resistance to communities under siege. It wasn't the career she'd imagined when she'd graduated from CUNY with her education degree, but it was the career she'd been given, shaped by 14 seconds of violence on a Thursday afternoon. She'd accepted that, more than accepted. She'd embraced it. Because if her trauma could be transformed into strategy, if her fear could be alchemized into tools that helped others resist, then maybe, just maybe, something redemptive could emerge from something terrible. That was the deeper truth beneath the headlines and the trial coverage and the dramatic rescue. Violence leaves scars, but it also reveals what people are made of. Communities under pressure either fracture or fuse. Elena Morales had become a catalyst for fusion. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she'd been ordinary enough that people could see themselves in her story, and exceptional enough that they could imagine choosing resistance over submission. 3 years from now, or 5 or 10, Another teacher in another community will face similar threats. They'll have to make similar choices. And maybe, if Elena's story has spread far enough, if the lessons have been learned and shared, that teacher won't stand alone. Maybe they'll have a community behind them, informed and organized and committed. Maybe they'll have systems in place for rapid response. Maybe they'll have proof that resistance works. That's the legacy Elena is building. Not fame, not heroism, not victimhood, but practical, replicable strategies for communities to protect themselves against organized violence. It's slow work, it's difficult work. Some days it feels impossible, but it's the work that matters. And Elena Morales, the teacher MS-13 shouldn't have taken, isn't stopping. Not now, not ever.